What's going on, y'all? Robert Sykes, KetoSavage.com, and today I've got special guest Wyatt Young on the podcast. He is a 21-year-old aspiring bodybuilder. We talk about business, we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about fitness and his journey to hopefully be doing my competition in September and his interest and desire to do so with a ketogenic approach. So he had a bunch of great questions that I feel like anybody wanting to get into a ketogenic competition prep would benefit from hearing. So without further ado, sit back, relax, enjoy the conversation with Wyatt. What's going on, Wyatt? How are you, man?
I'm pretty good. Robert, thanks for having me on.
Hey, man, I'm excited to be having you on and chatting. So I don't normally do much of an intro, but to give the listeners some context here, you were working at Shipley's Tree Farm this past Christmas. You've been doing it for 8-9 years now, you said?
Yes, sir. 8 years, yeah.
So we went in there, my wife and I, Keto, we got a Christmas tree on day one, and then we came back the next day to pick up a wreath that we had y'all flock. And then while we were there, you recognized me from the day before, and you were like, hey, man, you here to pick up that wreath. Mm-hmm. I think you said something like, you were wearing a heavy coat, but I could saw your traps popping.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm like, all right, this guy is after my own heart right here. So we got to talking, told you about Keto Brick, Keto Savage, the show. You said that you were interested in competing, mm-hmm. And then we started exchanging some emails, and you were like, I've got a whole bunch of questions. And you sent me this big, long email of a bunch of questions, and I'm like, tell you what, why don't you just come in? We'll do the questions in person on a podcast. I'll hook you up with some bricks because a lot of people are probably, want to do a show or have the same questions. So here we are. We just got done doing some deadlifts, yep. And we went for a trail run, and now we're going to dive into some questions.
Absolutely.
So again, this is totally unscripted, totally laid back and informal. But with you considering doing your first show, potentially my show, I'd love to answer any questions you may have as a first-time competitor.
Thank you so much.
What you got, man? Throw it at me.
Man, I got lots of questions. We can start just on training. Mm-hmm. So you've done a lot. You've trained a lot. You've gone through a lot of body changes. Is there a specific model of training that you've really started to identify with and helped you through the prep process?
Training, a lot of people overthink training, man. They want to change their training. They want to try and mix it up so their body stays, surprised and stimulated. But the main thing with training is just be consistent with it. And whatever training format you enjoy the most is likely going to be the one that you adhere to the most. So I've tried, like my first 5 or 6 years of training were probably doing like a bro split, like, having a dedicated chest day, back day, arm day, leg day, shoulder day. And I saw a lot of growth with that. But when you first start training and your body's not stimulated at all, and then you start training, your body's going to be shocked by that new stimulus. So you're going to be able to make all kinds of mistakes and still get some growth. Then after you've been training for a while and your muscles have reached some sense of maturity, then it's harder to put on muscle with, training in and of itself. It takes a lot more time to put on incremental increases in muscle. So at that point, you just obviously got to continue to implement a progressive overload. But for me, I've always adhered to like whatever I enjoy. And for the past 2 years, I've been doing a full body split because I like that. A lot of people that are taking, steroids and performance enhancing drugs, they can do a body part split and kill it, and then their body will recover in order for them to, add more tissue and do it all again, the next time they do that body part. But for me, as a natural athlete, I found that having a greater frequency is important. So targeting a muscle group at least twice a week seems to do well for me. With the full body, I'm hitting every single thing every single day that I train, which is typically 5 days a week. And I like that because I'm only doing one exercise for that given body part, and it's got ample time to recover. But I just started this week doing more of a, heavy hypertrophy split. So like Greg and I are working out, we're doing, heavy legs, typically by itself. And then we'll do like a hypertrophy legs later in the week. And then we'll do like a heavy pull day, hypertrophy push day, and then a heavy push day, hypertrophy pull day. So the main thing is to just adhere to it, obviously. But then if you're natural, I think hitting it at least twice a week, hitting a given muscle group twice a week makes the most sense. And then making sure you're eating enough food. But really and truly, finding a training style that you enjoy is the main thing.
So you spoke one exercise per body group. If we're going off my training, I have a lot of fun training. It's one of my favorite things to do. But I'm in the gym 50 minutes, and then I feel pretty good. Normally, it's 3 exercises per body part, muscle group. And I'll do about 2 muscle groups. So I'm in there not very long. Can you speak on the intensity of your training and how long you're in the gym?
I'm usually in there about an hour to an hour and a half. Normally not longer than an hour and a half. And if I'm pressed for time, I'll superset everything. So like I don't ever superset my primary compound movements like my squats, my deadlift, my bench. I typically leave those as standalone so I can recover between each set. But if I'm doing like buys and tries together, I'll superset those. If I'm doing like shoulders and like a chest fly or something, I'll superset those to kind of save some time and keep my blood flowing the entire exercise session. But if you're doing 2 body parts typically per training session,
Yep.
and then 3 working sets for each body part. Yeah, I mean you could do that. I mean my first.
I apologize. It would be three exercises.
3 exercises.
Yeah,
okay.
Typically I'll get out of there about 18 sets probably.
Okay, so if you're doing 3 exercises per body part, 2 body parts, how many working sets for a given exercise? Like if you're doing, like give me an example. Like what's a typical day for you?
I'll hop in. Normally I'll start with bench. I love bench, and I'll do a little warm up. Just throw the 25s on there, and then hop into a working set, and I'll do 3 sets. Of the bench.
And when you're finishing that last set, are you pretty much hitting muscle failure there?
I mean, it really depends. With I think the nutrition not being nailed down, I change a little bit day by day. Maybe more than you're used to at this point. But yeah, decently close, I think. When I feel really good and I'm leaving the gym, like holy.
Yeah, then you're
accomplished
smoked.
something today.
Yeah. So I mean, like a lot of people, like I know people that see success hitting, failure on every set. I see some people with success never training to failure. For me, I like knowing that I couldn't have gone another rep, and at the end of the day, that may cost me some growth because maybe I'm not repairing. Maybe it's giving me my growth. I don't know, but I like to train intensely, and kind of like we were talking about when we were doing deadlifts. Like you don't need to ego lift. Like I used to, ego lift to the point where my form would really start to suffer and I would hit muscle failure, but at the cost of quality form and at a greater risk of injury. I don't think that's necessarily worth it because that'll catch up with you over time. I got lucky. I haven't had any significant injuries, but now I'll typically train until my form starts to break, and then I'll incorporate like a drop set, or I'll do like a forced rep. I'll have a spotter help me get it up, and I'll do like some negatives or something like that, so that I'm hitting true muscle failure for a given exercise on that last set. But you don't have to do that every time by any means. But I generally try and train to failure on my last set of a given exercise, and I'll try and increase the weight with each set leading to that heaviest working set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
And with regard to nutrition, we can talk about that all day long because that's kind of where it really, the rubber meets the road. Because a lot of people, they'll have their training perfectly dialed in. They'll do all kinds of, tracking, and they'll have, the workout logs, and they'll implement progressive overload. But if if their nutrition's subpar, they're not going to be able to recover from that training. They're not going to be able to have the building blocks necessary to add more lean tissue or cause any growth whatsoever. So let's talk about nutrition.
Let's do it.
So what are you doing right now, first of all?
Right now, I'm just eating. I'm on the seafood diet, right? Seafood, eat food. But eating intuitively, which for me means normally 1 large meal per day, where I'll eat, I'll feel like I've eaten enough, I'm full, maybe even a little bit past it, but it's under my total calorie
so you're
under for the day.
You're under what you should be consuming.
Yes, sir.
You think?
Yeah.
And what do you think you should be consuming?
Well, I think my maintenance calories are at 6 foot tall, 175 pounds, probably around 3,000, probably about 3,000 calories.
Yeah, that's about my maintenance is 3,000 calories. I'm shorter than you at 5'7", 5'8", and I'm 192. So if we just assume your calories at maintenance are 3,000, you're 21 years old, you probably got raging testosterone. You probably need to be eating. If you're trying to grow, is your weight holding stable at 3,000 or
my
dropping?
Weight is holding stable remarkably, in a bad way. Like I'm trying to gain weight.
Yeah.
And my weight for 2 years has not changed a blip.
And your training has stayed consistent?
Very consistent.
Are you seeing increase in strength, or is it holding stable?
Yes, I'm seeing bench PRs and strength increases and isolation movements and everything else. But
bump those calories up, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was in college, so same situation you're in right now. I remember going to we're both at the U of A. Or when I was in college, I was at U of A, and I stayed in Pomfret at the dorm first year, and I would go to that chow hall there, and I would eat so much food. I took it way too far. Like, you don't need to go to that extreme. Like, I was eating 6,000 calories a day, and I would force feed to the point where I would literally puke every day because I was eating so much food my body couldn't hold it down, which is, you don't need to do that. But you know, it took me eating well over 3,000 calories to start gaining weight, and I got strong. You probably need to be somewhere in the middle. Like, you don't need to go to that extreme because that was unhealthy. And that was long before keto, so I was eating a bunch of processed junk food as well. But if you're not gaining at 3,000 calories, I'd probably bump it up by 100 calories every 2 weeks or so, and see what your weight does, see what your strength markers do. But if you're not gaining at 3,500 calories, then bump it up even more. But I would imagine you would start to see an increase in scale weight and probably strength performance markers as well once you start tipping the needle up. You just got to, kind of like we were talking about earlier, if you're under eating, your hunger is going to be, you know, like it's hard to upregulate your hunger hormones if you've been chronically under eating. So you've got to almost force feed initially until that all gets upregulated. Your metabolism is going to upregulate as well. Then you're going to actually start to feel hungrier, which is counterintuitive because you're going to be eating more food. But once you start doing that, everything will go up. And you got to kind of keep tabs on your composition. Like, you don't want to be putting on unnecessary weight, but a little bit of body fat gained, if it comes alongside increased lean tissue, is not necessarily a bad thing if you're in a building phase, you know?
And that can be hard sometimes. Looking in the mirror, you know, you've gained a little bit of fat. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, where's the muscles hidden underneath? So your strength increases. That's going to be where you measure.
That's the main thing, man. Because, like, it's hard. I mean, from a body composition standpoint, like if you're looking in the mirror and you're not, because like when you're losing body fat, you can see visually apparent changes on a week-to-week basis. You know, like when you're focused on losing body fat, you can tell that you're leaning out. You're starting to see abs you didn't see. You're starting to see veins you didn't see. It's exciting. When you're in a building phase and you start to see the scale weight increase and you start to lose definition, it's hard to justify eating more food. But if you're seeing, you know, measurable changes in your lifting markers, that kind of makes it an easier pill to swallow, so to speak. Now, if you start to see no increase in strength and you're just seeing the scale weight increase and you start to see, you know, like more joint pain and inflammation, then you can kind of like tap the brakes a little bit. But embracing a little bit of body fat gain, as long as it's coming alongside a positive, i.e. in the form of increased strength performance, which is going to indicate increased muscle mass, more often than not, then you can kind of, you know, bridge that gap in your mind and swallow that pill more excitingly.
Yes, sir. At what point does your physical, biological limitation come into play?
I don't know, man. That's a tough one. I mean, genetics obviously play a massive role. You know, my folks were not genetically gifted from a bodybuilding standpoint. I was 115 pounds when I started working out, so I was not, you know, born to be a bodybuilder by any means. But you know, that's the life that I wanted to live. So that's the life that I've made. Yeah, I mean, you got to kind of take what you have. You can't pick your parents, you know, so you got to just take the best you got and then make the most of it. So I don't feel like I've hit my genetic threshold yet, and I've been training since I was a junior in high school, you know. I'm seeing consistent changes year after year. I'm taking progress pictures year after year, and I'm seeing measurable improvements, and I don't feel like I've reached my genetic threshold or, you know, capacity. And a lot of people, you know, if you're taking performance-enhancing drugs, then the sky's the limit pretty much. You can just keep putting on muscle, but at the cost of what expense? You know, for me, naturally, I'm going to keep doing it as long as I'm seeing positive improvements. And the thing about natural bodybuilding is it's playing a long game, man. Like, you've got to have this longevity lifestyle, you know, mindset. And if you are seeing positive improvements year after year after year, for me, what motivation do I have to get on the gear if I'm seeing improvements naturally? But as long as you're eating right and you're lifting hard and you're recovering, then your body will continue to make improvements and grow, you know. Like Chip, he's How old are you, Chip? 54? 54? He just started lifting 2 years ago, right?
Less than that.
Yeah, about 2 years ago almost. And, he's seen significant changes in his physique. So there's like a lot of people think that, once they've hit a certain age, they're not going to see progress or whatever the case may be. But like when you're creating an environment of growth for your body with the right nutrition, with the right recovery, with the right stimulus, your body will respond favorably. So I wouldn't let genetics deter you from going full bore into it.
So I can train. We haven't been able to together get a full workout in, but I can train, and genetics, that concern's off the table. Back to nutrition, I eat whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I eat. I do really good with consistent food. So the same thing every day. That's fine with me. I don't care. But you're obviously the keto savage. So if you can, I've never done keto. I tried in the email. I told you I tried for a week.
Mm-hmm.
I did no carbs, very strict keto, and I didn't know how to measure ketones, blood glucose, sort of what that means. And at the end of it, I was feeling a little bit terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a whole huge loaf of bread,
Mm-hmm.
and was like, all right, we'll do something else. So, you've been a coach for a long time. For somebody trying to get into natural bodybuilding via keto, what do you recommend getting started?
Well, first of all, you at 21 years old, it's easy to eat a broader variety of foods and not feel the negative recourse that comes with that. As like a lot of people that do keto do it when they're older in life because they have some kind of health concerns. Their doctor tells them that they're pre-diabetic. They've got more joint pain and inflammation, so they're looking for a solution. And they turn to keto because that is a solution. So you don't see as many people younger doing keto because they haven't had any recourse to that action, the foods they've eaten up to that point. But if you lay the right groundwork on the beginning, you can likely bypass a lot of those negative implications that come later on. So there's not really any reason not to do keto when you're younger as well. As far as how to start doing it, a lot of people, if you go online now, like when I started it in 2014, 2015, there wasn't really any research or publications or resources for keto. So it's kind of just trial and error. Now you go online, you search keto, there's like so much conflicting information and you don't even know where to turn. You got measuring ketones, blood glucose, blood ketones, macro ratios, different keto foods. It just gets really hairy really quick. So like you can certainly measure blood glucose and ketones, and a lot of people like that analytical, data-driven, approach. But at the end of the day, when you adopt a ketogenic diet, technically you're born in a state of ketosis. Like breast milk is ketotic in nature; it's high fat. So as an infant, your body is using fat metabolism, from the get-go. A lot of people just, turn to carbs early on. Like you start getting fed, fruit purees and stuff as an infant. And you're not really in keto up to that from that point on. Like most people just follow a standard American diet. When you do that, you're eating a lot more processed foods, a lot more carbohydrates, glucose, and sugar, and that's taxing on the body if it's done in excess. Once you return to a fat-adapted fat metabolism approach, you're basically changing your body's energy substrate from carbs and glucose to fat and ketones, and that takes more than a week. So like when you started it for a week and removed the carbs, you likely dropped some weight initially because your body, flushed out some fluids, but you probably weren't supplementing with electrolytes. So you didn't feel good because your body was deficient in sodium and potassium. Plus, you've changed your energy source from the carbs and glucose that it's familiar with to fat and ketones, and none of those metabolic pathways are in place, so your body isn't efficiently using that for energy. So when you do keto, you got to kind of have more of a long game approach to it. Like people will start to experience some of the benefits relatively early on if they're taking in enough electrolytes and they're kind of hedging against that keto flu quote unquote symptom. But from a performance standpoint, from a training standpoint, it may take 6 months to be kind of back up to where you were when you were using carbs. But then once you've hit that threshold, once you've hit that point at which all those metabolic pathways are in fact in place and you're efficiently using fat and ketones, then in my opinion, there's no really reason to turn back to carbs because you don't need them.
So So that's very interesting. So my thought process when I start to think of that is
What else to do?
man, there's a lot, going off the checklist. So um, you so for me, I'm young and
Mm-hmm.
I care most about bodybuilding and progress and being the strongest, leanest, and biggest that I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm at this point, I'm able to take longevity a little bit out of the equation, not care as much about it being young and being a little stupid maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So am I giving up some gains, let's say, in switching to keto for healthier longevity, if you get what I'm saying?
I don't think so. This is a big point of contention amongst the dieting sphere. And when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, glucose, and you have, more insulin secretion, insulin is an extreme growth agent. It causes muscle tissue growth, it causes cancer cell growth, it causes fat growth. So if you are eating a largely carbohydrate-based diet, you are likely going to have higher circulating blood insulin, which is going to cause more growth. Some people believe that if you have carbohydrates and greater insulin secretion, then you will likely have more lean tissue as a result. That's why a lot of pro bodybuilders in the IFBB, use insulin as a performance-enhancing drug. My belief as a natural competitor is that if you are consuming more carbohydrates and have greater insulin, you may be able to build more muscle, but it's going to come with more fat as well and other negative things. And when you diet down for that show, you're going to have to diet harder to kind of, cut down that additional fat that you've built as well, which is likely going to result in some loss of lean tissue. So at the end of the day, when you step on stage, I don't think your package is going to be any better. I think, for me, being strict keto now for 10 years, even if I've sacrificed some muscle, which I don't really think I have, but even if I did, I don't have to lose as much fat when I do compete. So I retain more muscle in my fat loss phase. So I feel like I've looked better every time I've competed since going keto, and I'm obviously building muscle in that period. So for you at 21, I do not think you are at a loss by going keto now. And from a longevity standpoint, while it is true that you are so young, that's probably not the forefront of your concern. If you build the right habits and routines and just lifestyle factors into place now, then you probably won't be plagued with a lot of these ailments and illnesses that would come at you later in life had you not built the right framework from the get-go, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And ultimately, though, it may not be the most fun off the rip. I'll be thanking myself later.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, too, I don't think there's any loss of fun because, when I looked at what I did to compete when I was eating carbohydrates, I dieted really aggressively, and yeah, I got to eat carbs, but honestly, I look at people backstage now, they're eating rice cakes and oatmeal and plain rice. I'm eating bacon, eggs, and steak. I'd rather eat that than white rice, personally, So I don't feel like I'm at any detriment by not having the carbs personally.
Now, for me, and being in college and being broke, is there a price component? I mean, there is a price component, but how can I go about maintaining a ketogenic diet when I can't have steak all the time? Is this a ground beef? Carbs have been very cheap for me.
Yeah.
So rice has been a staple of my diet for a long time. How can I supplement that and maintain same prices?
Keto on a budget, man, is ground beef and eggs, brother.
Yep.
Ground beef and eggs. When you look at people's grocery carts at the shopping center now, the cost of food has for sure gone up. The carton of eggs today is more expensive than it was 10 years ago. It's more expensive than it was 6 months ago. But when you look at people's grocery carts, the expensive items are all the filler items. It's all the snack foods, it's all the single package stuff, it's all the just junk, If you, as you said earlier, you're fine eating pretty consistent meals, that's going to make tracking your macros, you're just going to make hitting your protein, fat, and carbohydrate targets easier. And if you do that with ground beef and eggs, I'd be willing to bet that you would save money doing that than if you were to have a whole bunch more variety with a carb dependent diet based in. And also too, like if you, like I just got a whole cow that I bought from somebody local, and it was like 450 pounds of meat hanging weight, broke down to $5 a pound hanging weight. Once it's all said and done, it winds up being $11.99 per pound of like packaged meat. And yeah, that's expensive, but it's like highest quality you can get grass finished beef. And your body's going to be able to absorb that nutritional profile and assimilate it better than it would all the processed cheaper foods. So like at the end of the day, you've got a micronutrient threshold you need to meet, protein requirements, calorie requirements, fat and carb requirements. And if you're eating food that your body can more readily absorb, you're probably going to have to consume less calories overall to get a better bang for your buck than just a whole bunch of calories in processed junk food to hit those micronutrient requirements, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
So
no more Taco Bell.
Yeah, no more Taco Bell. I mean, I used to eat Taco Bell too, man. I used to do, when I was in college, I remember going, I had like a late night class, like a philosophy class. It was like 8 o'clock philosophy class. And every day on the way to that class, I would stop by McDonald's and I would get a whole bunch of, what was their cheapest thing? It was like a burger, it was like a burger or like a chicken burger or something. But it was like 99 cents and I got like 5 of them. And I would eat those on the way to class to get my calories in. And it was cheap, but I mean, not healthy at all. And, just not good for you, and my body was getting the calories, but it wasn't getting the nutrition. It wasn't getting the nutrients it needed. So now I eat 2 meals a day, sometimes just 1 meal a day, but it's all really high quality stuff. And I spend money on food, but I could totally do it on a budget if I wanted to. And I have done it on a budget. Like before, I mean, I've been pretty broke at times too. I mean, like you can make it work. You just have to forego other pleasures in life. Like everything in life is a sacrifice. You just have to ask yourself, what is it you're willing to sacrifice, and what are you willing to rid yourself of to capitalize on the things that you truly want. And nutrition is one of those things that you don't really want to skimp on, So not that you're out buying, flat screen TVs, but for people listening, forego the flat screen TV and put the quality food in your grocery cart,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm visualizing the changes I can make just on the fly, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you can make anything work, man. And like when you look at, the nutrient profile of a quality ground, even if it's not grass finished, grass fed, like all the fancy frou-frou stuff, like you could just get a basic Walmart ground meat, ground pork, ground lamb, ground chicken, ground beef, and that alongside eggs, I mean, that's going to cover all of your nutrient needs right there. And you can get that on a budget for sure. So
one thing I've been interested and really excited to talk to you about, calories don't make sense to me very much when I think about it in the overall profile. Like when I wanted to bump up calories, when I would bulk up, I jump by 500.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump by 750 and just try and I want this be big and be strong. What really is the power of 100 calories? You were talking about earlier. Bump up by 100 calories. Start to see strength changes. And if you do, I mean, there you go. You're getting stronger and getting bigger. So what is the power of 100 calories? What does it mean to have 100 more calories in your diet?
Calories is a funny topic, man. Some people in the keto space hate the word calorie. They call it like the C word. They don't even want to talk about it. It's weird. Think of calories, like take that word out of the equation and just replace it with the word fuel or energy. We all have our certain individualized energy demands and fuel requirements, and a lot of people are deficient in ample fuel, or they're putting in a very poor quality fuel, or a lot of people are way overboard on fuel or taking in too much fuel, and that's why they're putting on too much body fat. And how the body responds to calories is going to be different on a host of different levels. It's going to be very individualized based off of genetic factors, hormonal factors, training and lifestyle demands, stress. All that stuff goes into play. Sleep quality, all that goes into play. But if you're relatively consistent on your inputs, like in your sleep, in your training, in your day-to-day factors, then calories becomes an easier, tangible way to pull the lever on one thing that you have 100% complete control over. Like for me, I cannot readily change my hormones. Having a 2.5-year-old, my sleep is oftentimes outside of my control. Stress with the business is always volatile. Like, those are all things that impact how my body metabolizes energy. But I can't as readily manipulate them like I can calories. Calories is a very tangible thing that I can totally manipulate by my will. You know, I can change whether I want to eat 2,500 calories or 3,500 calories by how much food I put in my mouth. So while all those things come into play and are very crucial in your overall health, well-being, composition, recovery and performance, calories is the one thing that I have complete control over. And when you're very regimented in your inputs, you can very easily figure out and dictate, okay, when I move this lever, this thing happens. And it takes some time. Like, I can increase by 500 calories and I may not see much of a weight change in the first 2 weeks. But over enough time, I start to see, changes take place. So of all the variables that I have in my life, the amount of fuel that I consume is a very easily manipulated variable. And for that reason, I consider it one of the ones that people should likely focus on first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. For me too, being at school especially, my brain power is being peak is pretty important to me. So a big discussion I've seen online about keto is that your brain uses carbs.
Mm-hmm.
With the keto diet, how long before your brain can start to use fat for fuel? Does it ever fully transition?
So your brain does require carbohydrates. Your brain has some baseline glucose requirements that you're never going to be able to escape from, even if you don't consume any carbohydrates. However, your brain can readily, your body can readily create those necessary carbohydrates via gluconeogenesis. So you can consume 0 carbs and your body will be able to basically provide the brain the glucose that it needs through gluconeogenesis. That's basically creating glucose through amino acids and protein. And it can do that internally without any input from you, just automatically. So you never have to consume carbohydrates in order to give the brain the glucose that it needs. Now, ketone bodies can also cross the blood-brain barrier and provide energy to the brain. So while it is true that your brain is always going to need some glucose to function properly, you don't have to consume any of it exogenously, because it all can be produced endogenously, but also fat can fuel the brain as well. And realistically, when you switch to a ketogenic diet, most people notice an improvement in cognitive function relatively soon, because when you are eating predominantly carbohydrates and glucose, you're going to have a lot more fluctuation in blood sugar levels and insulin levels and energy levels that also dictate, cognitive function. So like when you eat a big carbohydrate heavy meal, like if you're in class and you have a massive lunch, that class after lunch, and you're kind of like not all the way there, Yeah, you're not paying attention. Whereas when you switch and remove carbohydrates, you have more stable blood sugar levels. Your energy is much more steady state as well, just even keel throughout the day. So your cognitive function is also going to be more even keel. So you'll notice, cognitive improvements relatively short after adopting a ketogenic diet and lifestyle. And then the glucose that your brain does need, it can create internally without any input on your behalf.
Listen to you talk the talk, obviously walk the walk, competition success. Why don't more professional bodybuilders take your approach?
It's a good question, man. From an IFBB standpoint, people that are taking a lot of performance-enhancing drugs, they're not going to go the route of keto for a couple reasons. One, because they're also taking exogenous insulin to kind of get that growth as well. And if you're taking in insulin, it kind of defeats the purpose of eating a ketogenic diet. Even if they're not taking an insulin, I'd be very curious to see what an IFBB level athlete that adopted a ketogenic diet would perform like. I would believe them to perform totally fine. But I think in the bodybuilding space especially, there's so much dogmatic thinking and just habitual, bodybuilders are creatures of habits in general. And for far too long, the underlying principle has always been, eat your carbs for energy, and just go about it that way. So that's just ingrained in all of their thought process. That's just what they know. That's what they do. That's what I did. And then I decided to change it up, and I benefited from it. So there are definitely a lot more bodybuilders adopting a ketogenic standpoint. I've had several clients that have earned their pro status and outperformed the competition with a ketogenic approach, but you don't see much of it on the IFBB stage because I think the drugs come into play, and just this ingrained way of thinking is what kind of reigns paramount in that approach, in that group. But hopefully I can kind of turn the tides the other way as more and more literature comes out, more and more scientific research comes out, and more people do this with success.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I love to watch old Arnold videos and Jay Cutler videos, and they're talking about piling in 400 grams of protein, 1,000 grams of carbs, or something nuts. Probably not that much, but a lot of carbs. And so, in my thinking, I'm thinking of somebody like me, somebody in college, maybe a viewer, trying to change the way they live. How long? So 2 weeks to monitor changes, isolating one variable. Does that sound right to you? Taking the time to actually wait for changes to start occurring and monitoring your own body. It's hard for me to understand what's happening with my body.
Yeah.
Because there are so many other things going on, and I just don't fully understand that a change in feeling is related to, let's say, blood glucose.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people just simply lack this baseline, understanding of their body. Like a lot of people are just simply not in tune with their body and how it feels. Like they oftentimes just like turn to an over-the-counter drug to fix something. Like if they got headaches, they turn to, headache medicine. They've got aches and pains, they turn to ache and pain medicine. Like people just default to pharma as opposed to figuring out what the underlying root cause is. So if someone's wanting to take a very measured approach, isolate one variable at a time, and actually figure out what's happening from a physiological standpoint, then having some baseline markers in place in the beginning would be very, very interesting. So you could do a blood sugar test, you could do a blood ketone test, you could actually get blood labs drawn, test for lipids, test for hormones, test for C-reactive protein, and just see kind of what your baseline markers are, and then adopt a ketogenic approach and see what those numbers change to after enough time has passed. From a blood sugar standpoint, like if you're eating a carbohydrate meal and you test your blood sugar before you have that meal, shortly thereafter, like 30 minutes thereafter, and then an hour after and 2 hours after, and then you were to do that same experiment with a ketogenic-based meal, you'd be able to see a significant difference in what those numbers are doing, very acutely in that single setting. So having that clarity would be insightful for somebody that's wanting to take a measured approach. As far as, just things to notice, I would just be mindful of what your energy levels are doing throughout the day, what your sleep levels are like, what your composition's like, what your, performance markers are looking like, and kind of be mindful of that. But you would notice a difference cognitively speaking within, a day or two. You would notice a difference in your weight as you flush out that initial fluid within a few days. You would notice a difference in performance from an endurance standpoint, likely within a month. And then from a strength standpoint, likely within, that's going to be highly individualized. For me, I didn't notice really any decline in strength performance when I switched over to keto. But I think giving people the heads up of, hey, do this for at least 6 months before you decide yay or nay, because it may take that long to actually get back up on par with what you were doing from a carbohydrate standpoint for your body to upregulate those metabolic pathways and hit that same level of performance with the ketogenic standpoint. And then I believe it just keeps getting better the longer you're in it, which is why I've stayed strict keto for 10 years now.
And so how long until you knew you were locked in? Like, did you have periods at the start where you're like, that bit of carbs looks pretty good, No,
because for me, it wasn't even performance. For me, I was struggling with eating disorders. When I was doing carbohydrate diets, I would binge and purge. This was all after my first couple competitions, and I just went really deep down a dark rabbit hole of binging and purging and just having a very negative relationship with food. And for me, keto improved that relationship and kind of gave me some clarity as to what my body needed, and I didn't feel guilty for the foods I was eating because I was eating all real high quality foods, just real food. And that alone was reason enough for me to stick with keto. And then, the performance benefits were just like an added bonus for me. So getting my relationship with food recovered and healed was the main driving factor. And I noticed that within, a week or two. So that was pretty quick and apparent for me.
For the viewer, how do you realize that your relationship with food is skewed? Sometimes it can go unnoticed, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just doesn't get talked about enough, man. Like, I think now people are starting to be more vocal about it, be more upfront and honest about it. But like in the bodybuilding space, most competitors have some form of disordered eating tendency, or poor relationship with food, and they try to hide behind, this sense of moderation or something. But then after the show is over, it's very common to see competitors binging, purging, and just going down a negative feedback loop. And I think as more people become vocal about it, it becomes more aware. And, when it comes to how do people know, you shouldn't have to obsess over the food you're consuming. Yes, when you're in a strict competition prep and trying to get everything dialed into the absolute, finest detail and polish for stage, then yeah, you got to be a little bit obsessive. But for the average person trying to live their best life and have a healthy relationship with food, you shouldn't always be plagued with the sense of guilt or shame or obsession around the food you're consuming. At the end of the day, you eat to function. You fuel yourself for your day-to-day activities. And yes, food can and should be enjoyable, but it shouldn't be this insurmountable obstacle that you face every single day. And when you're eating real food, as is recommended with a ketogenic approach, because it typically is real food, it's you just remove that from the equation. You eat real food, you don't have a sense of guilt or shame associated with it because it's fueling your body. You're giving the body the most readily available, highly bioavailable, easily assimilated nutrition you can, and then it functions and performs as it should as a result of that.
Wow, that was big. Just you shouldn't have to obsess over food. That's really important because I've done that for a long time.
Yeah.
So one of the bigger questions, maybe one of my last questions I've got for you, is coming up into this competition. You got a competition coming up September, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long, on a ketogenic approach, natural bodybuilding, about how long should each phase be? How personal does it get? So I don't need to just copy exactly whatever you do, though I'm inclined to. How do you analyze yourself and your progress and see what you as a person need to do?
That's going to be, when I'm working with clients for a competition, I've got to take into account if they've ever done a prep before, because they're going to have to, if they've done a prep before, they kind of know where their body's been. I could have that data, and then I can kind of see how far they have to go. But first and foremost, you have to know where you're starting from. So know what your current weight is, what your current composition is, what your body fat percentage is, how many calories you're consuming, hopefully having a good baseline from a hormonal, metabolic, and caloric standpoint, and just being a good candidate to prep is first and foremost the key. Once you know that, then you can kind of reverse engineer and work backwards from there as to figure out how much time you need to prep for. So generally speaking, losing about 1 pound a week is relatively sustainable and relatively healthy. So I try and kind of structure things in that way. So I try and stay within about 20, 30, maybe 40 pounds of stage weight in my building phase. If I'm 40 pounds over stage weight, I've got a lot more to lose, obviously. And there's a point of diminishing returns. My last prep was 33 weeks long. That's a pretty long prep because at that point, you're just taxing your body. It's asking a lot of your body to be in a deficit for that long. So generally speaking, 4 to 6 months worth of prep time is pretty healthy and sustainable. I wouldn't really recommend much beyond that. So figuring out how much weight you have to lose to bring in the desired composition to stage that you want. And that's going to be dictated upon which division you're going to compete in. If you're doing a bodybuilding division, you're going to need to get more shredded than if you were doing a physique division. Like for me, doing bodybuilding, trying to get down to 3% body fat, then I've got to make sure that I'm giving myself enough time to lose that healthfully without risking the loss of a bunch of muscle tissue in the process. And after that last prep, anything beyond 33 weeks is just more than necessary. That's a long prep. So generally speaking, 4 to 6 months for most people would be a pretty good ballpark. And then once you've done a prep, you've got so much more perspective. Like the hardest prep is always the first prep, because then you've got this massive fear of the unknown looming every single day. That's because true. You don't know what's coming. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what your body's going to look like. You don't know what your mind's going to be like. Every day is like this mind state challenge. But after you've done your first prep, you have that perspective. You know how bad it's going to suck. You know how to hedge against that suck. And then you just get excited. And the first prep is exciting too. But like, you're going to make a lot of mistakes the first prep that you'll hopefully not make the second, third, and fourth. But knowing where you're starting from and then kind of reverse engineering from there based off of when the show is. So like my show is September 27th. We can get your body fat before you leave here because I got that in body. But, if you gave yourself 4 or 5, maybe 6 months, I mean, you're doing physique probably. So I would say 4 and 5 months, man, and you'd be dialed in.
On the cut.
Yeah.
So working back from September, 5 months, and then you're on the bulk phase until.
Yeah, so you could be at a higher caloric intake until that 5 months out, and then from there, we would start dieting down for that show. And then you don't want to diet super aggressively either. Like a lot of people, I've got my whole protocol that my course is built on, my book's based on, all that stuff. There's a lot of different ways to lose body fat for a show, but you want to do it in a way that's maximizing lean mass retention, skeletal muscle mass. So that's where it gets tricky. But you want to diet down slowly, conservatively, so you're not risking any loss of muscle tissue, and you're just making the process more sustainable and healthier from a hormonal standpoint.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you what, you've convinced me.
All right, man. You're going to be on my show. I'm excited.
I would love to compete in your show and to do it ketogenically. So, yeah, I'd love to return too and see the progress, see what's happening as the time progresses and doing it ketogenically. And, man, I'm excited to see what happens,
Yeah, no, I'm excited for you, man. I mean, 21 years old, you got the whole life in front of you. You got all this opportunity, all this potential. And for me, like you're going to school for business entrepreneurship. And, we didn't even talk about that on the podcast, but like for me, the business came after my love for bodybuilding. But bodybuilding has transcended the sport itself and taught me all these life skills that have bled into my entrepreneurial journey. Like, consistency, hard work, discipline, dedication, like all those things are quintessential traits for a bodybuilder. And you get that dialed in with this prep, then every other thing in your life will flourish as a result. So I'm excited for you, man.
That's so exciting.
100%. Well, where do people go to find out more about you, follow along? Are you on social or anything like that?
I'm actually not. And,
not on social.
I'd like to change that coming up, actually, with this prep and with the competition. For the longest time, just like with temptation with food, that's temptation with social media. I've just decided to go completely against it, and that's been the easy way to get around it. But
I respect that, man. Like, social media is tricky. Like, I leverage it, obviously, for marketing purposes with the business. And from a business standpoint, from a content creator standpoint, social media allows me to positively impact more people than I ever could if it weren't for social media. But the main thing with social is, like, you got to make sure you're creating and not purely consuming. Like when it becomes like this just addictive, drug, so to speak, where you just like veg out and scroll, doom scroll, like that's not a good thing. Nobody wins there. So if you can use it for good, great. If not, then probably better off not using it.
Right. Well, with the discipline creating and bodybuilding and the prep, I think that could be something I could add to in creating in the social media space would be really
document the journey, man. Document the journey. Well, Wyatt, always a pleasure, brother. I'm glad you were able to come out here. I'm glad we met you at the tree farm and that you came out and got a deadlift in with me. So it's good, man. I'm excited to see this journey progress, and I'm always here for you if you need me, brother.
Man, it means a lot. Thank you so much, Robert.
See you, brother.
See you.